What? Ah, hi, Grant Garfin here. We're about to have a very interesting discussion, and that is why I remain an Anglican. We have several participants, and we'll start off with Christopher Page, who will introduce himself and is the author of the blog that this will revolve around. Christopher?
Thanks, Grant. It's good to be here. My name is Christopher Page, and I am the Anglican rector of St. Philip Church in Oak Bay. I am a cradle Anglican, been an Anglican my entire life. I have been in ordained ministry for 34 years, pretty much without a break, and I've been 27 years in the same parish as a priest in the last 27 years. So I've seen lots of coming and going. I've been around a long time, and I am still, as I began, an Anglican.
Thanks, Christopher. Drew Brazier, please introduce yourself. Drew? Okay. We seem to be having fun there, so let's move to Megan. Megan, please tell us about yourself.
Hello, my name is Megan Crosby-Shear, and I am both a member at St. Philip and co-director of the Emmaus community here in Victoria. I was United Church all my life until 7 years ago when I joined Anglican Church of Canada. It has been my home ever since.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, we appear to have lost Drew, so let's continue on and we'll carry through. So, Christopher.
Okay, do you want me to go on from here and just carry on with the two of us?
I guess so.
All right, away we go. Megan, it's up to you and me. Okay, so the question is why I remain an Anglican. And it might occur to somebody to wonder why that should be an important question. It's a question that really came up for me the first time about 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I was actually asked by a local paper to reflect on that question, why I remain an Anglican. And the question emerged out of the awareness that there were quite a number of people who were becoming disillusioned with the direction of the Anglican Church in Canada, and that some parishes were leaving their diocese, and in fact in the United States, in the Episcopal Church, some whole dioceses were abandoning their place in the Anglican Church, in the Episcopal Church in the States. And so it may seem that that's an old question and no longer a tremendously relevant question, but in fact, as recently as last week, in the Diocese of Waikato, New Zealand, an entire parish has left the Anglican Church of New Zealand and set itself up as an independent community, Christian community. And the departures really all come over theological issues, social issues, particularly over the issue of people who are in same-gender relationships. So that's why I think a relevant question, and one that that we really might want to spend some time on. And this conversation we're going to try to have is based around 4 blog posts that I've written and they're posted on my blog called In a Spacious Place. And I'm going to summarize those just briefly, and then we're going to go on and have some questions around that. But I think Drew is returned from wherever he got lost in cyberspace. So Drew, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll go on and give some summary about the blog posts.
Go ahead, Drew. No.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I didn't. I was lost for a while. I'm a little confused here.
Go ahead.
I say, oh, go ahead, Grant, but do you want me to,
Yes, go ahead. No.
you want me, I did not hear what was said.
Okay. Well,
I just gave an introduction and to why we're talking about this, but we missed your introduction of yourself. So we're hoping that you could just say briefly
Okay.
who you are and how long you've been an Anglican and how you came to be an Anglican.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I can do that. I'm a Christian layman, and I've been here in British Columbia since 1972. And I've been attended in 9 parishes and 4 dioceses. So the only diocese that's left out is Kootenai. So I was called, I felt called to be a Christian when I was 15 years old. As a result, I went to the Anglican Church and I was confirmed. And since then, I've, as I said, attended actively and a member in the parishes. I've been People's Warden and Rector's Warden and done stewardship, maintenance, been very involved with Crusade, and I continue to be an active parishioner at St. Peter and St. Paul's in Esquimalt.
Okay. So I'm going to give just the 4 themes that summarize personally why I remain an Anglican, and then my hope is that I can pose 4 questions one at a time around those themes, and that we would just go around, starting with Megan, then Drew, and then I'll sum up on each question. Okay, so is that, we're okay with that? So the 4 themes that really draw together my sense of why I remain an Anglican. The first is the idea of diversity, that Anglican Church is a diverse, broad community that has the capacity to embrace a variety of theological stances, a variety of life practice, a variety of spirituality. And it's important to me that I belong to a Christian community that can have that kind of breadth and diversity. So diversity is the first thing. The second thing that causes me to remain an Anglican is my sense of the Anglican community as a worshiping community. We're a community that is grounded in Christian faith. We make no apology about that. We are not shy about the reality of our faith in Christ at the center of our lives and of our community. We gather together around the table, and the table is the table at which Jesus is present. So the second is worship. The third is I remain an Anglican because I am aware of the failures of my own life. I belong to a community that allows me to be human, allows me to fall short of the beauty and wonder for which I know I was created, and yet continues to embrace and welcome me. And the final thing is, I remain an Anglican because of love. And love causes us, love is always embodied in some place, some particular form, some particular environment, some particular relationship. So the Anglican Church for me is that particular community in which I find embodied the love and the reality of Christ. So diversity, worship, or faith, failure, and love are my 4 kind of themes for remaining an Anglican. My questions around that emerged sort of out of the blog post that I'd like us to be able to respond to a little bit, and then maybe have some conversation around. First, really around the question of diversity. It's a troubling issue for a lot of people. And I think the question that comes out of that stance is how it's possible for a community to maintain some degree of common identity as a community while at the same time embracing the kind of diversity and openness that allows for people to feel they are able to exercise their personal freedom, their own autonomy, and integrity as believers, as people living in response to the Spirit of Christ. So that's an important question to me, and I think it's an important question for people who have felt called away from the Anglican Church. They have come to the place where the diversity for them has become too broad, too open, and so they feel the need to draw away. So, Megan, you get to go first, and see if there's any response, anything in you that sort of is moved by that.
If I can just step in for a second, if people can turn their speakers down, what's happening is they seem to be running from one to the other and interfering. So,
is that better?
I think so. Okay, good. Now, I think Morgan, you about to say something?
Thank you. I think so one of the pieces that you have in your blog, Christopher, is that part of the richness and value of our community is that we have a broad spectrum of social, theological, ethical, and cultural viewpoints. And I think this diversity is part of what drew me into the Anglican Church. And yet in that diversity was a call to a deep and profound focus on Jesus Christ as the center and of worship, as you'll get to later. But I think our unity comes in that strong foundation to Christ as the center of our faith. And if we can hold that center, I think there's so much room for all kinds of ways of being church. And I think the gift that the Anglican Church brings is that commitment to hold the space, to have a center that is anchored in Jesus Christ, but that holds a place of hospitality and welcome that doesn't mandate what you have to believe on a social or political level, but calls you into a relationship with God. And through that worship and through that expression is the home that is created in the church. And so in that way, I think our identity needs to be clear and focused on who it is that we worship. And if that is our core, then for me anyway, there isn't a diversity that I can see that couldn't be contained in that, because of course we worship a creator that is in all things and has created all things. So I don't think there's a diversity that cannot be held in the worship of this God, and in a church that holds firmly to that God that we worship.
Thank you, Megan. Drew?
Well, you know, the question that why I continue to be an Anglican is one that I thought about in my earlier years, but now that I'm in my 60s, I've accepted that the Anglican Church is a good fit for me. You know, I like the Anglican Church because it's Bible-based, it has tradition, and it has reason. So it has all three. How much of each one is always up to debate, like many of the other ideas of the church. But I do consider that I'm comfortable with a church that does not see the Bible as its only source of wisdom. And by following the traditions of the long line of saints, but I feel part of this apostolic succession. Some people call this the middle ground, but I see it as taking into account all the sources that are shaping the faith. Part of this comfort is knowing that being Bible, tradition, and reason-based, will allow the church to reinterpret in light of today's world and make the changes that will inevitably be required to remain meaningful and relevant. I know that the change will be slow and painful, being based on careful reflection and prayer. But ultimately, change will happen, for failure to adapt will only result in our failure to follow the faith in God. I'd also like to say that the mystery of faith appeals to me. The Anglican Church has sacraments that we never fully understand, like baptism and Eucharist, and confirmation and absolution, and laying on of hands, the holy orders. These sacraments are God's free gift to all of us, and we won't explain the mystery of these sacraments. Our church also has creeds, the Apostles and the Nicene and other creeds, and also services. The form of service that we have in our Book of Alternative Services or our prayer book. And these traditions offer comfort, security, and familiarity. In the community of faithful followers, I gain great strength. So to be part of a parish community, a Dawson community, a worldwide community, I feel part of that. And I know that I'm supported by that local and world community of prayer and worship. God calls us all to be part of a community, not to be alone. For it is only through community and working together can we be supported and make a difference in the world. I also feel that the Anglican Church is important, is good for me because it accepts that incredible diversity that we see worldwide. This means it's inclusive, it's not exclusive. No matter where you come from, you will be valued, accepted. So when I fail, turn away from the church, I know that I can return and be forgiven and accepted. And I guess, finally, I comment that I've seen a lot of people who spend their lives searching for some ideal. But they never find it because they don't even know what it looks like, so they can't find it. So they are condemned to forever searching. I believe that you should bloom where you're planted. So make good where you are. Many of us are hung up on the failures of the church as an institution and use this as an excuse to justify not being faithful. The church is an imperfect earthly reflection of God's heavenly promise to all of us. I am called to trust in God and to prayer. Just as God accepts me in my imperfection, God will accept me as part of a body of believers such as the Anglican Church, with all of its imperfections. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. All right. Christopher?
Thanks, Grant. So it occurs to me that we have really moved very quickly on into the second theme that I identified as one of the reasons why I remain Anglican. So in a sense, we've already answered the question that emerges out of diversity that Megan said very clearly and strongly and passionately that at the heart of her sense of being an Anglican is the sense of being called into relationship with community, but called fundamentally into relationship with Christ and God. And it seems to me that at the heart of that, there needs to be a trust that all those who gather with us at the table have that shared intention. And if that's true, then as Megan also suggested, we can in fact embrace a large degree of diversity. But I'm wondering, and we're getting, time is moving on, so if we can keep our responses sort of in Megan's time frame, whether, Megan, you have any sense at all that there might be a limit to that diversity, and if there is, how we know when we reach that point. People are saying, I have come to the limits of my ability to embrace diversity. I need to leave this community. Is there any point at which you would come to that? And how would you know if you got there? Megan.
I think that if that's more if there might be a reason for leaving, and I think that's less about the core of who we are as a church, and more about an internal realization that I can no longer meet the needs of my faith expression in this particular space. I think if we are, as a church, if we are committed to that solid core, if we're committed to a passionate living out of our faith to the best of our ability within our home church context, and if we are forming people into that, I don't know that there's any diversity that church cannot hold. I think there's a time that a person may say, I am not at a place in my faith journey that I can engage with. That there are stuff I need to work out with God, with others. I may need to be held and nurtured in a different expression for a time until, God willing, they can re-engage. And maybe not. Maybe their journey takes them in a different direction, and we, again, trust that God is holding that process. But it may be that they can't be held within the uniqueness, the container that we hold as Anglicans. And I think that while that's super hard, and while there is pain in that, I think we have to also have those open hands that the Anglican tradition is so good at, of holding the open space and the open hands to say, we grieve your departure, and we trust that God will take you where God needs you to be. And maybe that will be home within this tradition, and maybe God has a plan for your continued faith in a different way.
Thanks, Mimi. Christopher?
So, Drew, do you have any sense of that parameters, limits, boundaries around which we might want to coalesce and be clear about?
Drew?
Yes, I've thought about this a fair bit in the church because, to be blunt, it can be very hard work. But I believe that if we all continue to always be reaching out, not looking inward, and look to love our fellow Christian, that we can overcome with God's help without any adversity. That said, though, you do need to have your faith in common, but really important to work at working at other things in common as well. I found that if you don't have those, you'll have people breaking off, which we know about, and when they do that, they start to look inward into their own little group rather than looking outward. I would say that that's one of the issues that parishes have. They tend to look inward rather than outward. So I think that with the ideals of our Christian faith, if we keep them foremost and always be looking out and loving our neighbor, I think we can overcome these difficulties.
Thanks, Joe. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so it's interesting to me that on one level, it's possible, considering Megan's comments, it's possible to consider that we might not want to be as agitated about this question, actually, as I find myself sometimes. I think Megan's right and wise to suggest that we trust God is holding all of us. We trust God is holding the journey of those who feel called away from us. We trust that God is holding the journey of those who feel called to stay. But Drew said, and I think it's really true and important to acknowledge, that human relationships are hard. Community is hard work. It's hard work to stay together. But that hard work is one of the ways in which God shapes and forms us as people and as disciples of Jesus. And it's one of the ways in which God knocks some of our rough edges off, the hard work of just being together in human relationships. So my third reason why I remain an Anglican is I'm a failure as a human being. I'm a failure as a follower of Jesus. I'm a failure as a person who imperfectly tries to embody that love that I believe is my true nature. And so I can only belong, really, to a group, to a community that is made up of people who acknowledge their failures. One of the things that I said in my in this third blog post around why I remain an Anglican is that the only reason for any division in the church is that we conclude we can no longer accept each other as we are, stumbling, confused, broken, and often alone. It seems to me that's a pretty radical statement, and I'm wondering whether Megan and Drew may have disappeared again. But Megan, maybe all up to you. Whether you find that statement resonates, whether there might be other legitimate reasons for separating from a Christian community, and whether we could ever know, or whether there are any sort of standards that might help us understand when it is when in fact it's time to move. You know, I've thought about this as comparing it to marriage, and the reality is there are times in a marriage relationship when a person needs to separate from that relationship, and they would only ever do that, I'm sure, with pain and with struggle. But we need to acknowledge that the time might come when it's important to separate ourselves from a relationship or from a human community. So I'm wondering maybe if you can reflect a little bit on how we know that comes, how we know that we've reached that limit of endurance, of healthy shaping in the hard work of community. Megan.
Thank you. I appreciated you drawing out the pieces of those places within ourselves and with our community that we fail, because I think that gets at what it means to be in community with one another. That this is not an idealized journey. That there will be pain and struggle, and we will see ourselves at our worst and others at our worst and their worst rather. And I think that recognizing that gets away from the consumer element of, okay, this church community is doing this, so now I'm going to leave it. And maybe the next one won't do this particular thing that annoys me. Or the music will be better, or the preaching will be different, or everyone will be more welcoming. definitely that consumer impulse that we gain from our culture, as well as from, I think, our own human impulse. So I think within what you're saying is a deep call to commitment within a home community. And I think that there is a recognition that, yes, there is times when that can no longer be the fit. And I think on both sides there's a danger, because I think, especially with declining numbers, with that being a focus, people want to hold on to those numbers and hold on to those people as long as possible. And then if they leave, there seems to sometimes be this, oh, well, you left, therefore I'm going to hold some kind of feeling about that longer than need be. And I think that there are times when either it's, you talked about home a lot in your blog post, and I think that home can be both a place of welcome and a place of pain. And there are certainly times within the church that we hurt one another, and sometimes those relationships that are damaged, I feel, may need another space to actually work that healing. And I think it's just a call for such self-reflection and discernment as a community, to be able to be very honest about your own spiritual journey and recognize that it's not about the preacher, it's not about the community necessarily, unless there are pieces that need to be brought up and reconciled. I think you were preaching not too long ago, Christopher, around that reconciliation piece that Jesus talks about, of going to each other, of bringing the community with, of doing those pieces well and first, instead of leaving a community without actually acknowledging the pieces that were hurtful or that are drawing you away. So that kind of honest and self-reflective piece of not just leaving because it's going to be something different somewhere else, but recognizing that actually it's because you need to heal, or because you need to be nourished in a different form of spirituality that could build up that part of your life with God. And I think honesty and transparency in that is so key in those pieces.
Okay, Drew, you've been reflecting on the reality that as a community, we will only ever do the hard work you mentioned of being able to stay together if we acknowledge that our community is an embodiment of people who fail, people who let one another down, people who at times hurt one another. And so I've been sort of urging us to consider further whether there's any limitation to our call to stay in a situation that is painful. Human community can be painful. There are times when it's legitimate to say, this community is no longer life-giving for me, no longer a healthy place for me to be. And the question is, how do I know if I've come to that place? How do I know if I've got to that place where I need to say, for my well-being, for the well-being of my family, my spiritual life, I need to separate from that community? What might that look like for you, Drew?
Go ahead, Drew.
I hear you. What would the community... So your question is, what would the community look like? What would that feel like?
The question is really, what would it look like for you in your life, in your heart, to know you had come to the place where it was time for you to consider that a community of which you're a part is no longer life-giving, is no longer a place of spiritual nourishment for you, and you had to separate yourself from that community?
Well, I have been there in parishes before where I have felt that I wasn't being nurtured. I had felt that I wasn't being supported. And I have reflected on that. I think I must shoulder some of the blame. There was enough blame for everybody involved with that. And I ended up leaving that parish and moving on to another parish where I felt more accepted, more loved, and more respected, I would say. And for me, I knew that I was at that point that I needed to do something because I felt angry over time. And when I went and I was within that community, I felt anger towards it. And I found that that was eating me up. When you're angry a lot, um, you hurt, and you can be hurtful towards others, and it's just totally damaging to your own self-confidence and your own ability to go forward. And I wasn't able to love when I was in that angry state. And I was so unhappy that I knew that I had to do something. And what I did was is I did switch from one parish to another, and I felt that that was at that time was the right move for me.
Thank you. So both responses really point us towards, again, the hard work of what it means to be in loving relationship. And I think both of your responses acknowledge that there is, in the past of any community, in the past of any human relationship, there is a recognition of pain, there's a recognition of failure, and both of you really looked forward to the possibility of emerging out of that pain, out of that failure, not denying it, not ignoring it, not pretending it didn't exist, but emerging out of that experience as more whole people and with a possibility of moving forward as a living community of faith. And I think that's really where we are now in the Anglican Church of Canada, very much, that we're at a place where we need to say, the past has been difficult, the past has pain in it, had wrong in it, failure in it, and what we're really looking for now is the way to move forward as a living, loving, open, embracing community of nurture and care and love and compassion for all people. So it's a big question, and it's a kind of abstract question, but I wonder, Megan, if you have any reflection on what it looks like from here for us to move forward as a living community of faith. Megan?
That is a big question. Actually, when I was thinking about this, I came across this quote from John F. Hovey. He writes on non-Anglo-Saxon Anglicanism, from one of my studies in the past. And where is it? He says, straining toward the transcendent and the eschatological realization of God's kingdom in the whole of God's creation, waiting for the realization of God's ultimate purposes. And I think there is something to that as a church that is incarnational, sacramental, that strains toward God's kingdom realized, that we need to hear, and I think be intentional about recognizing if there are voices that still feel like they haven't been heard within the process, so that we can truly walk forward together. And then having done that piece of the listening, the reconciliation, then to again, back to the beginning, to refocus on who it is that we worship, whose it is that we are, and to say that there is something much bigger than just our piece of it, that we are all, as God's body, straining toward the fulfillment of God's kingdom on earth. And that is a vision worth getting captured by, a vision of the church that invites us all into both a nourishing of our parish and Christian communities, but also ascending into God's amazing creation, and to be both the witnesses of that and to see with our eyes wide open those pieces of God that are all around us in very unexpected places. And I think you point to this when you say that we do not create God's work in the world. We find where God is at work and support all people in finding God's presence in their lives and living more fully in alignment with that reality. And I think getting captured into the vision of God's kingdom, of the life that Jesus calls us to, is how we move forward as a living, passionate, breathing, spirit-filled church.
Thank you. So, Drew, any reflections on what it looks like to move forward as a Christian community, as a living expression and embodiment of Christ's love and life in this thing we call the Anglican Church?
Well, I believe that, well, I'm called to love God, and that means that we're called to love one another. And that's what a community of believers is required to do. So if we're there, if we accept each other as fellow Christians on a journey in the faith, if we accept each other with all of our imperfections, strengths, imperfections, all that we are, and we go forward and we offer that to God, that means that as a community that we have great strength. And I think it's important that we not get hung up on a lot of details, as I call it, that won't in the end make any difference. And that community must be Christ-centered, and we've said that a number of times. That's what we are all about. We are Christ-centered, we're going forth, we're doing God's work here on earth. And we know that it's imperfect. We know that we will only, that here on earth we won't achieve that. But it doesn't make any difference. We're still called, and when we're called to our Heavenly Father, we know that we will have that perfection. And I think that community, that loving community that works together, plays together, lives together, is what we're called. And I think that's what the church is and will be.
Thank you, Drew. So both of those are just such heartening and lovely responses. It occurs to me as we probably need to wind up here, but it occurs to me we might call this conversation Three Old Guys and One Bright Young Spark, because the three of us, Grant and Drew and myself, we're moving towards the twilight years of our lives. And maybe that enables us to bring some kind of wisdom and some kind of insight, let's hope. But the thing that really heartens me in this conversation is the energy and the commitment and the vision that I see in Megan. I see it very much corresponded in Drew. But I think as a community, to the degree that we are able to embody that spirit that Megan's talking about, where we are deeply rooted and deeply grounded in faith in Christ, and where our goal is to embody that in love for one another, and then in a love that expands out and embraces all of God's world and all of its brokenness, all of its hurt, all of its heartache, and all of its pain, that there is just great hope for the future and great promise for moving forward. I was talking to Bishop Logan the other day, and he has been bishop now for 3 or 4 months here in the Diocese of BC, and he's traveled all over the diocese already. He's a man on a mission. And the mission at the moment seems to be to speak to every Anglican on these islands, Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. But he said in all of his experience so far as bishop, visiting so many parishes, he has always come away feeling deeply encouraged and deeply fed by his experience in those parishes. And I think the thing that is touching him is that he's experiencing what we've been talking about, that we are a community grounded in faith, rooted in Christ, and sharing that from generation to generation, starting with really young people and coming up all the way to us old guys. So I'm really grateful for this conversation. I'm really grateful for the faith that I experience even in this odd medium that we've been trying to navigate today, and that it can be used as a tool. And I commend Grant, much as you're part of the Gray Hair set. It's an amazing gift to us, I think, that you're trying to help us expand and reach out through new mediums, new technologies. And I really bless you in that, and find it encouraging that we can start to try to explore new ways of being community and of embodying Jesus in the world around us. Looks like we've lost Drew again. So, Megan, have you got any wrap-up line that you want to take away from this?
I know the only piece that I don't think came out, which was very present in your blog post, was the table, was coming around the table. And that certainly was a huge piece of my coming to the Anglican Communion, was the centrality of the sacrament of Eucharist and its power in nourishing and tending, and the way it draws us together as a community. So I thank you for bringing that out in your post as well.
All right, Grant.
Just thank you all. The content has been excellent, and I'm sure we'll get better at the actual presentation.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone. And we'll look forward to talking with you in the future.